Hi everyone, I'm Laura Gail Locke. On this edition of Local Loop, we're going to talk to you about the economic development efforts going on in our city and the renewed sense of urgency to focus on jobs and pushing our city to the next level. We're very pleased to have two representatives from the Greater Wichita Economic Development Coalition with us. Seated next to me is Steve Sharp. He is the volunteer chairman and he's also an executive at Spirit Aerosystems. And then we also have Tim Chase, who is the GWEDC president. Thank you both for being here.
You're welcome.
My pleasure.
Well, for anyone who isn't familiar with your organization, will you just explain a little bit about your mission and what you guys are trying to accomplish?
Sure. GWEDC really has four main areas of focus. The first one is marketing Wichita and the greater Wichita area. And Tim can probably expound on that a little bit more, but we do that in many ways, from going to trade shows to meeting directly with businesses that are interested in Wichita. The second area we concentrate in is helping businesses that are already here grow and develop primary jobs. Thirdly, we focus on bringing companies in from outside that would want to relocate into Wichita and provide, again, primary jobs. And last but not least, we are the single point of focal for any company interested in growing or relocating to Wichita. We bring the resources of the city and the county along with a lot of private resources together into one coalition, and we're able to address most interested parties' needs through that process.
Got a lot going on. And I understand you guys are also affiliated with the Chamber, is that correct?
Correct.
And how long has the GWEDC been in existence?
I believe this is our 10th year
Yep.
in existence.
And break down those four categories for me a little bit and tell me about what you guys are trying to do specifically with each one.
Well, so marketing is fairly broad. The team, Tim has a staff of very highly trained professionals that go out into the world globally. They attend conferences, air shows, trade shows throughout the world, Germany, France, Britain. Recently we've been to all of those, along with multiple opportunities within the U.S. that we can come in contact with companies that might be interested in relocating or locating or growing in Wichita. A lot of their focus is on attracting and getting attention to Wichita so that we can get on the list, because every company when they're looking to grow has a short list. And so the marketing arm of the coalition is really aimed at getting on that list, getting the opportunity to present our city to those companies. And then from there on, it's up to us to try to close that process. But the marketing side of it is really trying to get on the list, short list, for most companies to either relocate or grow here in the city and surrounding area.
And which types of companies are you trying to attract to Wichita?
Any company. I mean, we look at aerospace for sure, but we also have been successful with NetApp, with some recently with some hotel properties. What we're really trying to do is draw primary jobs, and primary jobs are jobs that bring wealth into the community. In other words, most of the companies we look at, we want their revenue to come from outside of Kansas, so that we're bringing that money into Kansas, we're growing Kansas, instead of just recirculating the money within the community. So our primary focus is what we call primary jobs, and primary jobs are jobs that mainly the revenue or the product that they produce or service they produce is sold outside of the state of Kansas.
That results in a increase in the size of the total economy in our region. And we feel like if we can impact the size of the economy, get it larger, get the pie larger, then all of the service sector companies that we have here can carve out their slice of that pie. And as companies look at marketplaces, see a bigger pie, then they come in because they'd like to take advantage of it. And I'm talking about retailers, banks, hospitality industry, restaurants, and that sort of thing.
So it's the multiplier effect. Every dollar we can bring in that is driving revenue outside the state, that dollar then multiplies multiple times within the community as Tim said, service companies, lawyers, doctors, grocery stores, that money circulates within the community and multiplies. So our job is to bring the primary jobs in so that then the multiplier effect will happen within the community and grow the wealth and the overall financial strength of Wichita and the surrounding area.
And you mentioned NetApp, and you've mentioned some other different, sectors, but talk a little bit about diversification and what you guys are trying to accomplish.
Well, we're known as the air capital, and one of the things that has really brought the sense of urgency is we haven't seen a lot of growth in aerospace in Wichita. Although the general aerospace community outside the business jet world has grown significantly, it's mainly grown outside of Wichita, and we're losing brand names like Boeing from the community. So one of the sense of urgencies is in the aerospace area to at least maintain or grow that sector, but at the same time not rely solely on aerospace. So we've concentrated heavily on high tech, research and development, working with WSU and NIR. A lot of those applications are outside the aerospace business, and then working with any industry that we can diversify the community. NetApp's a great example of where we had the right assets in the community in the form of the Cisco Systems Lab at WSU and a strong computer science department at WSU, really along with their presence already here in the community, made it the right decision for them to come to Wichita. But economic development's not only just marketing, it's helping the community realize that things like NIR and NCAT and WSU are great assets for us to market out to the external world outside of Kansas.
I think there's probably some people out there who haven't heard of NIR and NCAT, so you talk a little bit about what that means and what those organizations do.
Okay, first of all, NIR is the National Institution for Aviation Research, and NCAT is the National Center for Aviation Training. Both are unique in Wichita in that NIR provides research and development into complex materials and structures used mainly in the aviation world, but which have applications in multiple areas such as medical devices, cars, other applications throughout different industries. NCAT is a very unique in that it is focused on training aviation employees all the way down the factory floor, training them to operate high complex machines or to program those machines, training them how to design aircraft structures from a training standpoint. And it's a great selling point and a very unique selling point for the city of Wichita and Sedgwick County to have those two institutions here in the area.
And Steve talked about the selling of the community, and we treated that just like a product in anybody's business. And the product has to be what the marketplace wants and needs. It has to be priced in such a way that it represents a good value. And then you get customers to, close the deal. Mm-hmm. When I just got here about 5.5 months ago, and one of the selling points for me to come here, quite frankly, was what does Wichita have that is truly unique in the marketplace? What are the differentiators that we can hold our hand up high and say, this is special, this is new, this is different than what the other cities across the country are? There's like 12,000 economic development organizations, and they're all doing the same thing that we're attempting to do, build wealth within their respective communities. I personally believe it's one of the most competitive businesses that you can ever imagine. And so these kinds of differentiators are what business takes note of. If there's a support system for them that makes them more successful in this community than in another community, that's the way they're going to make their decision.
Could you give me an example of how maybe one of these organizations has really helped a business?
Well, I'll use, and it's not NIR or NCAT, but I'll use the Cisco Labs and NCAT and the NetApp application. Because we had a talent pool coming out of WSU, and there's not very many Cisco Systems Labs in the world, it really attracted NetApp to Wichita to say, I'm going to have a pool of students coming out of WSU, out of a very unique laboratory environment that is not available in most of the communities in the U.S. And so it's not the only selling point, but it's one of those things, like all of us in marketing, something draws us to the mall, something draws us to a store. What's the key thing that caught our eye? And having NIR, NCAT, the Cisco Systems Lab, all are items that draw attention to Wichita and make companies take a second look at us and say they have a resources that's unique to the community. Having WSU here in general, a large university within the community, is an asset. And so what we're really looking to do with those assets is get the attention of companies, and then we can tell the story much broader about the community, what we have to offer, the great workforce, the great work-life balance that we have, the things that are happening downtown. All of those are selling points, but will not be the things that catch these companies' eyes. And things like NIR, NCAT, Cisco Systems Lab, WSU, will be the things that catch their eye, that at least get our name on that short list, which is what we're trying to do.
What else are companies looking for?
Well, usually companies wait and wait and wait and wait before they add new capacity, if they're going to, because they need to have the shortest period of time between the time that they write the first checks and make an investment and the time that their return on that investment shows up on the bottom line. And what they'll do is, because they've waited perhaps too long, they go out and look for a building or a site that will fit their needs, that they can acquire quickly. If it's a building, maybe they can retrofit it to what they need cost effectively and in a very timely fashion. And so probably 50% or more of the inquiries that we deal with are real estate related. A solution to their problem in the form of a real estate answer is what gets their first attention. The other half are workforce, as Steve has said. The days of location, location, location being the mantra have sort of gone behind us now. I believe they are behind us. It's now labor, labor, labor. The one thing that differentiates a community from another is, can your company locate here and find the talent that they need to be successful? Because if they can't, then they're going to go on to the next location where they believe they can. And so the NCAT and IR, those build those confidence, that confidence in businesses, so that they can be assured that they're going to be successful. We're a partner with those companies. We represent their interests, and because we want them to be successful, wildly successful, if they locate here.
So one of the other great selling points is we truly have a coalition. The coalition between our elected officials and elected entities and private individuals. So the coalition board is made up of both sides of that. There are members from the private sector, such as myself, and then members from the public sector, such as county commissioners, city managers, things like that. That's key in that if we need to bring in a potential company and show them what our workforce can do, we have a willing pool of private individuals who are working in the companies in Wichita that take them out and show them what Wichita, the people of Wichita can do. It's a very strong selling point to take them, especially if it's within their industry, to take them out. And the private sector provides that view into the marketing side, along with helping everybody understand what the private sector's wanting. And the marketing team that Tim runs, we give them a perspective of this is what really goes on behind the closed doors in a private company or a public company, but the private sector of the business. So there's a strong coalition between both private and public entities.
And you might think, doesn't every community have that same mindset and same fire in their belly to make things happen? And the answer is they don't. The answer is, I've seen communities where the prospect is in and they have a meeting, and in many cases the community leaders are coming in and they're introducing themselves to each other for the first time. as opposed to when we get a prospect here, our leadership is talking about how their son or daughter did in the Little League, and what are they going to do, where are they going to go golfing this weekend. So that when you have a customer that's looking at everybody and listening to everything, they put a lot of weight on these folks got their act together, quite frankly. This isn't the first time that they've experienced this sales pitch. Mm-hmm. And that is another reason that when I saw that cohesive leadership, that says I need to be part of that.
Tell me a little bit more about how the coalition operates and then works in partnership with the GWEDC.
Well, the coalition is the GWEDC. Okay. It is a board, like any other board of any entity, that meets on a regular basis. That board really provides for two things. One, the strategy of GWEDC. It provides resources, as I've already explained, where if we need to tour somebody around or talk, somebody in one industry needs to talk to somebody that's interested. The last part of it is really, as any board, we're responsible for bringing Tim on board, and then Tim operates the day-to-day operation. And so it's really a governing body that helps Tim determine the strategy and what directions we should go. And again, that's a partnership between the public and private sectors.
What would you guys say are our strengths and weaknesses?
We've already talked about a lot of our strengths. We have a lot of assets. We have a great workforce that's highly desired from a productivity standpoint. And we do have a very active coalition. We recently polled the leadership team, it was formed by the Chamber of Commerce, and asked them on a scale of 1 to 5 where they thought we were at with economic development and how good we were at economic development. And they came back with about a 2 to a 2.5 out of a scale of 5. And then we sat down with them and said, well, where do you think we ought to take the community? Where do you think economic development ought to go in the Wichita and the surrounding areas? And they came back pretty solidly in a 4.5 to 5 range. And so if you think of it, we're about half as good as the top leaders of this community think we ought to be, but we're not failing. We just need to step up the game to the next level. And that really doesn't mean that Tim's guys probably work that much harder. What it really means is we bring much more of the community together to focus on economic. If we really want to grow jobs in Wichita, it's not going to be Tim's staff make that happen. It's going to be community leaders. It's going to be the community in general having the desire and the will to drive economic development and to promote Wichita and to bring jobs into Wichita. It's got to be a community effort because a few of us cannot make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
And if you imagine for a minute those 100 folks that are on the Leadership Council plus the variety of other organizations here, each man and woman have a I'll say Rolodex, and I didn't fully understand what that means, but I've been talking sometimes of late, and people say, what's a Rolodex? Their personal network, okay? And if we could just take half of their personal networks and knit them together and look for common threads and the relationships that would build, and then add to that Wichita and the opportunities that are here, I truly believe that we would have a significant larger number of folks that are waking up to what I call the aha moment. You get a fantastic wow in Wichita. Once people come here and they start looking around and they see what we have, it is always a wow. I didn't know. You really have some spectacular assets here. I wish I'd known sooner, that kind of thing. And so in terms of what maybe is our weakest point, I would say we need to do a better job of telling the story. We need to have a louder, ramp up the volume, first of all, and then secondly, look for new ways and different audiences to tell this story to, so that they get the wow, and that causes them to come here, as opposed to we wrestle with them to get here and then they get the wow.
That makes a lot of sense. You spoke earlier about having an available inventory of sites. How are we in that area?
Well, I think we're making some excellent strides. In the last 24 months, there has been a significant increase. There has been a story that has been told probably over the last 5 to 7 years that says we know that if we had more inventory, if we had more product to sell, we'd be able to close more deals. I mean, it's just kind of simple. And so all of a sudden, we have started seeing that result in new properties coming on the market, both just vacant sites in terms of industrial parks, and we're seeing some buildings that are coming on the marketplace. And that's new enough, it's fresh enough that the outside world begins to take notice of that. This is a change that's for the better in Wichita. And one group that we market to are site selection consultants. This is a group of men and women who are intermediaries between the CEO and the decision makers and the communities. And the 12,000 communities all knocking on the door gets pretty noisy to the companies. And these folks are able to go between the two. And so what we've done is said, pay attention to what is new in our marketplace. We have multiple buildings that are in the market for sale, for lease. We have new industrial sites that have sewer, and they have water, and they have railroad, they have roads, high visibility, electricity, natural gas, all meeting in one spot. And so we're not as robust as we could be, and I hope we can continue to build that inventory. But I think in the last several months there's really been some significant progress.
And that's really, Tim's done a really good job in the last 5 months, bringing the private sector from a real estate standpoint much more into the game, because it really takes, we're not going to do this with public money from that respect. You're not going to build buildings and buy land with public money. So you really need the private sector's help. Only when it gets to be a really big project, and I'm talking about a company that would bring 2,000 jobs to the community, do you have to get the public involved on that scale from a real estate or asset standpoint, because no one private sector developer probably has that kind of clout. But those come along once in a while, and when they do, we bring all of those assets to bear to say, what can we do to try to address a company's need that might be able to bring those kind of jobs to the community. But that's improving. I mean, 10 years ago, most companies would come in and say, I want a parcel of land, and I'm willing to take a year to build my building. Today, most companies come to us and say, within 90 days, we want to be in the building producing product, which means the attention span of those companies is much shorter. They want to invest and reap the benefits in a short period of time. And so it's usually 90 days to 6 months from the time that you would close the deal till they want to be operating. And that's much shorter than it was 10, 15 years ago.
So given that tight turnaround, are we having to turn many companies away because we don't have available sites?
I wouldn't say many, but I would say some. And a lot of what's happening at this point in the economy is companies want to explore their options. If the economy begins to turn in their favor, and each company has sort of a different metric for what constitutes their favor, then if they had to add capacity, they better know what is necessary well ahead of time. If, on the other hand, their economies reduce and slow or even stop, then they've got a whole nother set of decision making that they have to do. Well, during this period of slow economy, those companies are doing due diligence. They're looking and exploring both scenarios. And so we've had a lot of inquiries where people are saying, sort of on a speculative basis, what do you have? If this happens, I need this. Do you have it? And so there aren't a lot of folks then that are actually pulling the trigger, so to speak, and executing and closing deals. you might use the cliche tire kicking. And we've had a significant amount of tire kicking going on. So the fact that we haven't closed the sale isn't necessarily because there's inventory lacking as much as it could be. There is inventory here, and they now know that, and when the time comes, they'll look at pulling that trigger.
But one of the things that's exciting is what Tim just said. The level and the amount of inquiries we're getting is growing, which is very exciting. We're not, not every one of them results in jobs coming to Wichita, but just the fact that the amount and the frequency of that tire kicking is happening is exciting to say, hey, the economy, you can kind of see it start picking back up. Companies are starting to be interested in maybe venturing out and investing. Some of them do, some of them don't. But the whole volume is starting to pick up, which is one of the reasons why the sense of urgency is here. You've got to, in economic development, a company only comes around once in a while, and you've got to be able to jump on that opportunity. And so we feel that the momentum's starting to move. The sense of urgency is we've got to be on the top of our game, and because we want to get in on hopefully the resurgence of the economy in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. When you guys are meeting with these companies, given all that, how important are public incentives to them, and would you explain what public incentives are?
Okay, so public incentives, I think all of us, if we could do it without public incentives, we would, but it is not viable. The economics of economic development, the marketing, if you don't have incentives, if you don't have enticements to companies, you're automatically marked off the list. So we might be able to attract them with, let's say, NCAT or IR. They come talk to us and say, hey, what can you offer us? Because these three communities are offering these incentives. If we could not offer them incentives, that would probably be detrimental to the fact that we have NCAT and IR. So, and those two are just examples. So economic development today has an incentive component. There are communities and states that have hundreds of millions of dollars to incentivize companies. We operate with a few $1 million a year between the city and county. They also offer property tax abatements and things like that, but very few direct cash incentives, a few $1 million a year, as opposed to a community like Oklahoma City, who operates with $75 to $100 million in economic development funds that they then are able to use to entice companies to come to the Oklahoma City area. Topeka uses a lot of incentives. It's not just the fact that we want incentives just to have incentives. It is absolutely essential to winning in the economic development game. And in order to go from a 2.5 to 5, we're probably going to have to step up our game from an incentive standpoint. And we look at that on an ongoing basis.
If you look at the competition a little bit more broadly, we've done deals where we were competing with South America, with Mexico, with China. We lost a project to China, Poland, Spain, and in that realm, you have countries that have said, we are so desperate to have economic development, job creation, wealth building. We'll carve out a section of our country and we will have zero taxes in this. You locate within this bubble. Inside this bubble, you pay no taxes. Outside the bubble, you do pay taxes. That's kind of the level of competition, because it's not just within the United States. It is global in nature. And there's two kinds of incentives. One, the first kind deals with a company is asking for, what do you have? There's lots of pieces and parts to that. And maybe the company might need, for instance, a large volume of water to process. And we might have a site, but the volume of water that we have at that site is not sufficient. And so we would use some of the resources we have to level that playing field, get or convince the company that we can get the level of water that they need. So now we're in the hunt. where before, without using that money, we were outside of the process. And the second use of incentives is when it comes down to finalizing between this community, and perhaps this community. You use those incentives to close the deal. You say, if we give you this, then you agree to come and set up your business here. Or if we give you these incentives, you agree to expand your business here as opposed to expanding it in one of the other locations within your division. So there's an if-then that you're getting to. So you're actually using the incentives to close the deal.
And in all cases, we claw back on incentives. In other words, the company must commit to essentially a long period of time being established in Wichita. And if we do provide incentives from the state or the city or the county, there's a clawback clause that says if you decide to leave the area within a given period of time, then you owe back that money. So we try to make it beneficial to the community, and that the incentives that we're using actually provide more wealth in the community in the form of tax basis and that multiplier effect that we talked about.
And there's a minimum that the city and the county look at and say, for every dollar that we invest in a company to create jobs, we must be assured that we will see $1.30 back over some period of time. And so it's actually one of the few departments of a government where you could spend $1 and you actually increase revenues long term. As opposed to most of the ways our tax dollars are spent is an expense that has no opportunity to return.
So one more thing on incentives. We talked about the gain from 2.5 to 5 or 4.5. In order to really step up the game, we're as I said before, we're probably going to have to go further into the incentive world and make some long-term investments. And as Tim alluded to, that may be in infrastructure. That may not be directly to a company. That may be directly to a company to offset the investment of building a new building or buying equipment or training employees. And to do that, it probably means we have to step up that game. We have Tim's doing a lot of good work with marketing. We're working a lot with the community on assets that we've already talked about. But incentives will close the deal. And what we're finding is that's what it's going to take. It's probably a higher level of incentive power than we have today to close those deals as we go forward. It's a very highly competitive market.
And those are all very compelling reasons, but if there's anybody out there still watching this thinking government shouldn't get involved, I mean, what would you say to convince them?
Well, government shouldn't get involved in the form of again, building buildings, buying land. But government represents the community and represents the public. I think the majority of the people in Wichita would like to see Wichita grow, the tax base increase, have that multiplier effect within the community. And when I talked earlier about it's going to take a community or a family to do that, it's going to take all of us. Some of that might mean that we as taxpayers invest in our community, either in infrastructure or direct incentives, in order to grow the community. And so it's all in our best interest to do that, and it's going to take all of us to do that. And that may mean some of our tax dollars are spent on some levels of incentives, but it's going to take all of us to do that. Again, we can't generate, we can only generate the leads and do the marketing, Tim's team, but to close the deal, it's going to take all of us, and that probably means all of us from the private sector, providing our input and helping these companies come on board. And from the public sector, it may mean that we all need to join together, and when the right opportunity comes along, that we may have to invest in our community.
Tim, you were speaking about how the incentives often close the deal, and then when we don't offer the same level of incentives as other cities, how often would you say we're losing out?
Well, being relatively new, I don't have a lot of direct experience with we lost 10% or 20% or 30%. I think that we have been able to assemble a significant amount of resources, not just cash for jobs, but other aspects. And in most cases, we have succeeded. Now, there are a couple of cases where companies have said, sorry. Your question stems from why should taxpayers underwrite the cost, perhaps, of private business? Well, let's think for a minute as though this economic development is a private business. And in private business, you have a set of decision makers, a board of directors, and they have a fiduciary responsibility to make decisions that will generate more profit for their customers, for their shareholders. And if they make a decision that in this location they could get more profit, or this location they would have fewer dollars in profit, they don't have the luxury of making that decision. They have to decide, with some of the Sarbanes-Oxley and laws, they have to decide in favor of where do they think their shareholders will profit the most, okay? So as we then assemble all the resources that we can to make sure that they can make more profit in our location than in another location, the use of government funds is warranted so that we can actually write down the cost and they can make more profit. Now, right or wrong, as Steve says, in a perfect world, I don't know one of the 12,000 economic developers I referenced earlier that would not gladly say, forget it, we're not going to do that anymore. Let the companies fall where they may on their own merits. And then they follow that up with the sentence that says, okay, you go first. You stop using incentives first. And of course, that doesn't happen.
So let me make something clear. When a company looks at Wichita, they've got a checklist. And that checklist it could be 40 or 50 things, but it's productivity, it's workforce, it's work-life balance, downtown, some of the things that we have there. They have a checklist that they're comparing different communities against. Incentive is just one of those, and it's usually one of the last ones. But if you don't measure up across all of those, they're going to score you and say, okay, Wichita has all these things that somebody else doesn't have. So this isn't all about incentives. This is all about being able to be on that checklist and get positive marks from infrastructure to workforce to training and education to land and buildings, and finally to incentives. Any one of those areas get us off the list. And typically, by the amount of inquiries that we have, we only succeed probably less than 20% of the time. That's okay. I mean, in any business, that's the case. You're going to spend your marketing dollars, and that doesn't mean 100% of the people that you touched are going to come in the door and buy your product. So it is a whole gamut of what we've talked about today, of having that infrastructure, having those educational resources, having a productive workforce, having a great community to live in with arts in a downtown that's vibrant, and last but not least, having the right level of incentives to be able to attract companies. But not having any of those will get you off the list really quick, or they'll mark you off very quickly from a private company. So our job is to make sure we're looking across that gamut, and incentives is just one piece of it.
If you guys would talk a little bit more about how you're going to continue to work on that list and move the needle, and kind of what your future plans are.
Well, because we are, again, a private-public coalition, we spend a lot of our time at our board meetings and subcommittee meetings talking about those things with our public partners, with our private partners. How are we going to move all of those needles forward? We're not the base driver. We're certainly not driving downtown development. There's the whole Downtown Development Corporation has that incentive, but having that and having to be able to communicate with those entities, and Tim's team taking that with them when they go visit a company and knowing how to market downtown, the arena is a great asset. That's our job, is to know all of those things and be able to use those as marketing tools, and to be able to inform the community how important all of those things are, and keeping those things vibrant and attractive to corporations is a big deal. And so we try to make sure that message gets out. We can't actually do that because we can only concentrate on so many things, but we can get the message out that these things are important. Having these things in the community help check the box, as I said, for companies to say, yeah, Wichita is a place I would want my employees, my executives to live in.
Absolutely. Is there anything you'd like to add, Tim?
Well, I think that raising the volume on the story that we tell will generate a certain amount of increased activity and interest in the community. So that, again, that wow before they get here, as opposed to wrestling with them to get here and then they get the wow. But that isn't in and of itself enough in our estimation. We have to be a lot smarter. We have to work a lot harder. We're looking at a three-pronged diversification strategy that takes into consideration diversifying within aviation, and it also takes a look at what is the new thing that will drive the economies of this country and Wichita and the state of Kansas as the economy begins to get a little bit stronger. And if we can attempt to sort of look around the corner and see what those things are and prepare for them, we think that we'll have a better success ratio. And I think there's some things that are going to be happening in the not too distant future around manufacturing. There's a lot of talk nationally about what can we do as a nation to sort of rebirth, if you will, manufacturing jobs. And there are certain aspects of manufacturing that are going to be more profitable here than in other parts of the world. And so that is part of it. There's really, if you had to pick one thing that will differentiate Wichita from the rest of the noise of competition, I would say it is labor. It is our workforce. If we can develop a workforce that is incrementally better than the competition, that will result in moving the needle, as you say, in the right direction. And I'm so convinced of that the reverse, the other side of that coin, is communities who follow a business as usual strategy with regard to workforce are going to simply fail. It's just that easy. You've got to get the workforce piece correct, and the communities that don't get that correct are going to pale in comparison.
Well, that's great. We have that asset. Is there anything else you guys would like to add, or any place people could go to learn more about the GWEDC?
Well, we do have a website, and we can get that website out to anybody who would like to go look at it. I guess my closing comments would be, again, we're not going to take economic development to the next level without the community. And so the more people that understand that economic development is important to the community and are willing, from a leadership standpoint, from every day, to commit to growing the community, the more successful we'll be at moving economic development to the next level in Wichita.
I think it boils down to, and I'm not going to steal Steve's line because he uses it very well, but how competitive do we want to be? We know the landscape, we know what these conditions are. In terms of the you, me, everybody, how competitive do we want to be in this world of economic development? And when you start thinking about and answering that question on a personal level, what can I do to be more competitive? What resources can I bring? That really can stimulate a cascade of decisions that a community can make with regard to being more competitive.
Absolutely. It takes a team to get it done.
That's right. Absolutely.
Well, thank you both for all your hard work that you're doing for our community and for being here today to tell us more about it.
Thanks for having us.
And thank you for watching this edition of Local Loop.